budget build after budget build, I've shown how to make easily repeatable and modifiable budget gaming PCs ranging all the way from $1,000 to a measly $100, even in between these two budgets as well. I'd like to think they are all fairly reasonable, but I want to do at least one more that is just a bit cheaper than $500, still fairly reasonable, but also allows you to have wiggle room to figure out parts and build with ease while still having effort thrown into assembling it at the end of the day. Can I do it for 300 smackers? Where's the intro? With $500 using all new parts, I showed previously that you could make a relatively decent budget gaming PC. But obviously, if I were to grab a ton of used parts instead of all new, it would have been a tad better so as long as I scoured the internet for deals and waited patiently for sales. And that principle is going to be shown a little in this build today. There will be a lot of twists and turns, so buckle up. Just like how I am twisting and turning the packaging for our motherboard just to pull it out. At least I know it probably wasn't damaged in shipping. But it isn't just a motherboard in this case. In fact, I was even met with a surprise once I fully opened it. But first, let me say, a quick and sometimes easy way to build a budget gaming PC on the cheap is to buy parts in pairs or combos, which is exactly what I've done here. The most common ones are motherboard CPU combos. However, sometimes you can find other bundles that people put up online. This can eliminate the hassle of worrying or wondering about whether some more complex parts are compatible with another one, especially if you are a bit new to building PCs. And as you might imagine, this is exactly what I have done here in relation to our motherboard, but I was met with a minor/major surprise, which, well, let's talk about the motherboard and CPU I purchased first. I decided to go with at least an 8th gen Intel board because I wanted more than 4 cores and possibly an upgrade in the future. That being said, a good 6th gen or 7th gen board is still a decent option on the lower end. And so I decided to look specifically at H310s and found a listing that paired it with an i5-8400, which isn't far off from what I was going to choose initially for my CPU, being the i5-8500. The listing noted it came with a motherboard, CPU, and I/O plate. Remember, it's important to make sure you are getting what you are seeing in your listing, and had some RAM sticks in the board, but didn't mention if I could get them or not. So for roughly under $100, that seemed like a great deal to me. However, I was surprised to get not the RAM sticks in the photos, but basically the RAM sticks in the photos. Cool. Not gonna complain about that. 16 gigs of DDR4 RAM is nice, even if they aren't blazing fast. It just sucks because I might have already bought some. Anyways, fun. Well, anywho, yeah, our H310M Pro VDH is a wonderful used motherboard that supports 8th and 9th gen Intel CPUs. The board can hold up to 32 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM that can be maxed out at 2666 MHz, which is fair considering the age, and has almost everything you would want out of a motherboard today. The CPU, as mentioned before, is an i5-8400 that has a base clock of 2.8 GHz, but makes up for this with a boost to 4 GHz, which is very nice. It has a L3 cache of 9 MB, which isn't too shabby, and a TDP of 65 watts, which is very important to this build. But more on that in a little. And finally, our RAM is, well, it was going to be this, but it doesn't matter that much anymore. They are just some random no-name RAM sticks that are clocked at 2400 MHz with 8 GB on them each. RAM's RAM. Anyways, yeah, 16 gigs of RAM for free. Or maybe bundled with, I don't know. Believe it or not, it isn't that crazy for you to get RAM in these motherboard CPU combos, or other components like storage for that matter, when you buy these online or in person. In a weird way, this was a trade-off because usually instead of RAM, you are given a CPU cooler already mounted and whatnot, leaving you to just getting RAM or an M.2 to complete almost the main board assembly section of these sort of budget builds. But this is an opportunity for a learning moment in cost-saving exercise. Remember how I mentioned our CPU only has a TDP of only 65 watts? That is fairly low, and the reality is we don't need a crazy heatsink with copper heat pipes to keep it cool. Now, I swear I'm not going for the stock Intel heatsink here just because I have multiple ones. Wait, actually, yeah, I am. Let me explain. The stock Intel heatsink is more than enough for our CPU here because of the low TDP and for the simple design that was made to clip on our cooler to the motherboard. But more importantly, because we don't need to spend a lot of money on a fancy CPU heatsink right now. These old stock coolers are notably only $10 online, which aren't a great deal since you can get some fancier or even better heatsinks if you look around or patiently wait for some sale to go on Amazon or whatever. But these guys are manufactured for pennies, and if you look more locally at marketplaces in your area, they are normally found for half the price. These bland coolers are everywhere because they were included with Intel CPUs for generation after generation after generation. So you can even probably find or get them for free in many cases, as did I. If you can't find them and want to cut costs down heavily, AliExpress CPUs can be a couple bucks. Hey, it's an option. But these otherwise acceptable heatsinks do the job well for our build, and for the sake of my argument and for what I've shown you, let's say in this case I paid $5 for this one, which is really realistic for what they go for. And hey, if you try to find them yourself, you might even be lucky and find the rare copper core versions that perform a lot better. But enough on that. After putting a bit of thermal paste on our CPU and attaching our cooler, it is time to pivot to our next part. At this budget, any case will do, like the Cooler Master Q300L, a classic if you will. But I also wanted something just sleek enough while also being just a touch different from what is normally picked in our limited price range. Since our motherboard was a Micro ATX form factor, I purchased the wonderful Versa H18TG from Thermaltake. It will fit our parts easily, give us room for upgrades, and included pre-installed exhaust fan and a nice tempered glass side panel, all for just $46.10. This case is simple, effective, and even comes with this nice LED light strip that you can turn off and on. Gotta check that out once this guy is fully assembled and working. Besides having to remove a stubborn standoff to relocate it to a more appropriate spot for our motherboard, our case seems solid, which is nice to see considering the value and how much we have spent on it. Now, there is one flaw outside the power button feeling a bit flimsy on this guy, and that is in relation to our next part. I believe when building a PC as cheap as this, you can really go low for storage, as you can always upgrade or add more as time goes on. Especially since our motherboard supports up to 4 SATA ports, meaning we could mount 4 drives easily no problem. Originally, I was thinking of going with a 500GB SSD, but ended up settling on this 256GB one from Patriot. It is a solid drive, and while it isn't a huge amount of storage, we can always add more, as I have mentioned, and save our cash for better parts that we will need for right now. Oh, and the one flaw about our case, which really isn't that big of a flaw and more of a case-by-case situation. Man, the amount of repetition in this video. The flaw is that our text or whatever is upside down for our SSD. But once again, that isn't a big issue here and doesn't impact our performance, so who really cares since maybe your SSD won't have this issue with this case. Moving on to what matters to you all and might be a make it or break it sort of situation is our GPU. Now, looking for deals locally is always going to be your best bet, but whatever works for you, works for you. I personally was going to get something like a GTX 1060 with 6GB of VRAM, which is a decent option if you can get one for a good deal, but also wanted something that also doesn't cost too much but gives me 8GB of VRAM for how much I have tried to cut costs in other areas. I ended up searching for the classic RX 580 deal on AliExpress and was actually shocked that they weren't as cheap as they used to be, and found out they were cheaper on average over on eBay. Pretty surprising, but also not that surprising. I found a great deal on this RX 580 for just $69.55. I haggled it down from $5 instead of paying $70 plus tax, which I think is very reasonable. It is technically a slightly underclocked RX 580 in some regards, but it's nothing really super noticeable in real-world performance, so all things considered, it is a fair price to pay for this GPU. And for our final part, one that is very strange because, well, I like myself a good deal on something while not sacrificing too much. And so I picked up this Cooler Master 550 watt power supply from GameStop. Yep, that's right. I got this fella a while back by pure chance, and, well, it was a great deal. I can't remember exactly what I paid for it, though, because, well, I kind of lost the receipt, but I remember it being about like $36.99 or something like that, and I know I definitely didn't pay more than $40. So for the sake of the bill, let's just say it was $40, which for many name brand reputable PSU companies is about what you would pay for a power supply with an 80 plus bronze rating. Which this isn't even bronze, it is only white, I think. But for components, this is more than enough for the system. It comes with a 3-year warranty and all that jazz, so yeah, it should be fine. Great. So, after a bit of cable managing here and there, taking out the GPU briefly so I can better access and connect all of our front I/O, having to look up the said I/O pin headers for what goes where, only to find they are designated on the board all the way on the left despite the header being more to the right, it was finally time to reinstall the GPU, clean up the rest of the PC to... Actually, before we close it all up and do all that, let's see if everything is working because, well, the last thing I want to do is have to diagnose or figure out what I did wrong or if something is broken. And, I didn't even have to hit the power button there, but it seems like it wanted to come to life more than I wanted it to. Cool. Everything seems pretty good thus far. All we need is one more key ingredient to finalize this build. But instead of using steak, I'm going to try chicken this time. Analogies. Yes, we all use Windows, and I personally would be using Windows 10 for our build in the typical use case. 11 sucks. But without spoiling the final numbers, you might imagine we are low on cash and about to go over in the budget for this build. So, why not Linux? You can't game on Linux or do anything important with it, you may be hastily typing up right now, and I would have agreed with you probably like 5 or 10 years ago, but Linux has made some great strides in recent years, and isn't a bad option. Plus, it is free. You can make a dual boot setup too, just in case Linux isn't your main thing, but for once, I'm going to use it because, well, I think everyone knows how well the RX 580 performs already, given how simple this setup is, and that there's probably tens of thousands of benchmark videos using similar or identical setups just like this one. But the bigger question becomes, which distro? I asked the best of the best, or rather one of the few Linux guys I know of, the XIT guy, for some thoughts based on what I was thinking, and he gave me a great place to start, which led me to do some research and explore all sorts of alternatives. Eventually, after watching some neat videos and reading posts all across the web, I settled on Bazzite, which is a very custom Fedora distro, at least from what I understand, that has Steam OS built into it, which is sort of what I wanted from the beginning. It is very simple to follow and makes it easy to grab the specific ISO file that you need for your system. And bam! Download it, write it to a USB stick, and then just install pretty much exactly how you would with Windows. Shoutouts to Tech Yes City for helping me settle on Bazzite, by the way. He made a couple of fun videos on the topics with plenty of information for people who might be interested in making the switch. But yeah, after finishing the setup and logging into Steam, it was a bit weird at first for sure, but if you have used Steam's big picture mode, it isn't that jarring as you might imagine. Honestly, it feels a little console-like, which makes sense and originally was what I was going for. After a few installs, I did some basic bench tests with decent results, but only noticed one main issue. Out of the handful of games I ran through initially, which some don't even have a Linux version, which is cool to see running, I noticed some weird rhythmic stutters. The actual frame rate wasn't impacted at all. In most cases, if the frame rate was limited to 30 FPS, it actually ran fine. Obviously, 30 FPS is not really acceptable for most people, and yeah, I wouldn't want it to stay there if it were up to me. I am certain someone in the comments will tell me that something is either on or off, and I need to switch it to another setting to alleviate this issue, perhaps keep it running on Steam Deck mode for particular games, or possibly to just install some sort of patch for a separate application inside Linux. But other than that, many of the games I gave a go ran splendidly, and colored me shocked with how seamlessly they ran. Like, forget this is Linux for a second. Drop someone down in front of this PC, hand them an Xbox controller, and ask them how it feels. And they wouldn't be able to tell you if it was a PC or a console. Well, okay, maybe they could because they could see it literally, but you know what I mean. Or more importantly, rather, what operating system it was. It feels responsive and sleek in the same way Windows does. Besides the few hiccups that I encountered, which are probably really easy fix, it's a great $300 reasonable budget gaming PC. And even with a free version of Windows that may or may not have a watermark just hanging in the corner, it would also run great as well. But honestly, if I didn't like the whole Steam Deck GUI, which you can always just switch over to the regular desktop interface to use it like how you normally would, there are just so many distros or versions that can accommodate your specific needs with ease. And overall, it seems pretty great to me. However, the most significant part of this build is the budget. And the big question is, did we go over it? Well, including thermal paste and a pack of 6 SATA cables, since we would technically not have any of that in a typical first build, yes, we would have a tad. But technically, while I did buy RAM for this build, we didn't actually use it or need it, since we already got RAM when we purchased our CPU motherboard combo. So when you actually look at the numbers, no, we were actually fairly in budget. Which, if you excluded the paste and cables, like if you already owned those or something like that, yeah, we had plenty of room to play with on better parts. A $300 budget gaming PC is very realistic to work with in getting exactly what you want. You can spend more on storage for a lesser GPU if you don't play a lot of high-end games, or a better CPU if you need it for more multitasking. And with the way I built this one, we could upgrade to a very impressive 9th gen i7 if we really wanted to, slap on a better CPU cooler, or get a fairly powerful GPU later if needed. Obviously the same can be said for storage, and doubling our RAM by replacing the old ones while increasing those speeds as well. If it were up to me to decide how to spend my money on a PC, having to choose a particular budget, besides perhaps the $500 tier, I would happily build a reasonable $300 budget gaming PC any day. Fun build, fun build. I think it turned out pretty good despite some little issues I had with Linux on some of the games I tested. But despite those issues, if I had to daily drive this guy, I would definitely spend a bit more time optimizing and fixing all the simple issues and really invest into storage down the road. Otherwise, what did you guys think? Was it a reasonable $300 budget build? Could it have been done better? Is Linux a deal breaker for you? Let me know down in the comments below. I would like to hear your experience or ideas on the subject. If you liked this video, leave a like. Subscribe for more content like this if you want to see more. Join the Discord, follow me on Bluesky, yada yada yada. And oh, as always, thanks for watching.